scary stories. So, originally I wrote this up way back in November or December, but for various reasons I never got around to posting it. There was a recent Ask Reddit thread about that incident at camp though, and it reminded me of this. The story is probably over 40 years old now, from when my mom was a summer camp counselor as a teenager. Every counselor present swears that this tale is true. The following tale is long and consists of a few smaller events rather than one single encounter. So I have divided it into 4 main parts to make it a little easier to read. To give us an idea of the setting, it was and still is a pretty normal summer camp, about 300 to 400 acres, with 5 cabins, each assigned a letter A through E. Every Sunday, a new batch of campers would arrive around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and on Saturdays they'd leave by noon. Half the summer, it would have boy campers, and then the other half, they'd have girls. My mom was there for 2 weeks during the girls' half. She drew a helpful diagram of the camp. Cabins A, B, and C are on top of a hill, along with a small chapel. And cabin D, which was basically used by counselors as a meeting space, is at the bottom of the hill. It's partially built into said hill, so people could feasibly walk onto the roof from the hill, which neat. And cabin E, meanwhile, is located on another hill entirely. That circle and lines next to it are a fire pit and seating, which takes up a good amount of space. The road marked at the bottom of the map is an access road my mom hesitates to call a road. One direction goes to town and the other dead ends, adding another summer camp totally unrelated to my mother's camp about half a mile away. The properties do not connect. It was on the other side of the road, but it was there. The creek had a couple of footbridges you could use to cross. So, for the first week my mom's there, there's not many kids, so they only have senior counselors present. Most of them were in the 17 to 21-year-old range. My mom would have been around 17 or 18, since she was still in high school. On Thursday night, she and a few other female counselors were hanging out in cabin D and talking when they heard something on the roof. At first they figured it was a raccoon, but then they realized the noise was too loud. 2 of the girls decided to go outside and investigate. While they looked at the roof, 2 of the male counselors came running down the hill. My mom actually drew the path on the diagram while explaining the story to me. The girls are at that big dot, and the 2 guys are coming from the chapel. Hey, I think we just saw a guy jump off the roof and run into the woods. Just as they had said that in that moment, they heard an unexpected sound, an engine. They looked down at the access road and see a car's lights suddenly light up. Someone had parked there in the dark with the lights totally off, in a spot slightly hidden from their view due to the trees and an angle from their location. On top of that, they can see another figure running to the car and hopping into the passenger side, at which point it tore out of its spot and sped off back towards town. So to recap, there was a man stomping around the roof. This man jumped off and ran down the hill and crossed the creek to the road, where another person was waiting in a car hidden from sight and with all lights off, and drove off. This is obviously not normal. You know, in horror movies, teens and young adults tend to joke about the obvious signs. There's a monster lurking around waiting for its target. Turns out that's actually pretty accurate. Instead of getting creeped out like a rational person, my mom and the other counselors found it more funny than anything and started joking around about it. Someone threw out the name Nerd on the Roof, and it stuck. It became a running joke among them, shortening the name to Noor. Now my mom's memory is a bit spotty about the timeline of this next particular event, but it almost likely happened on Friday, the very next night. Remember how Cabin E is way far away from the others on the diagram? The diagram does not feature the vast swath of trees that also surround it. This cabin is so far removed from the rest of the camp, it actually had its own telephone connecting to the main part of the camp. This was during the 70s. Cell phones did not exist yet. Since it was so remote, they actually assigned older campers to it, but during my mom's first week, they didn't have enough campers to need it though, so my mom and the other two female counselors were assigned to sleep there. So on Friday, the phone rings in the middle of the night and wakes them up. One of my mom's fellow counselors answers groggily, "Hello?" Uh-huh. Okay. She then hangs up, grabs a broom, leans it against the door handle, and crawls back into bed to try to return to the sweet land of dreams. My mom and her other counselors are confused, ask what's going on. They get this sleepy response. "Fred said he thought he saw someone in the woods and heading down here with a gun. Oh." Instantly, my mom and the other girl are wide awake and go into panic mode as they recognize the potential setup for their starring scene in a real-life enactment of the plot of Friday the 13th. Meanwhile, the girl who answered the phone just tries to go back to sleep, apparently confident the broom will foil any attempts to break into the cabin. Fortunately for them, no one came busting down the fortified door, and soon enough, one of the male counselors arrived with a shotgun. He stayed over the rest of the night since he, like my mom and counselor number 2, has some doubts about how effective a broom is at keeping out intruders. As you can probably tell, my mom now finds this particular part of the story funny due to her friend's lack of reaction and survival instinct. It helps that the night passed peacefully with no sightings or scary events. However, the next morning, they found the phone line had been cut. That is a little less funny and made them a bit more weary, but this whole night would just be more of an afterthought after the next events. Cut to the next day. As I said earlier, the campers would leave on Saturday morning, giving the counselors a bit of free time until the next batch arrived on Sunday. They'd go into town on Saturday afternoon to get laundry done and pick up essentials. Now, despite having 2 summer camps, this was a small town, small enough that it only published a tabloid-sized newspaper once a week on Saturdays. This week, one of the counselors just happened to pick up a copy, and it was mostly forgotten until later that night when they were hanging out in the pavilion playing cards. In between turns, someone glanced at the police blotter and suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my God!" Remember that other camp I mentioned at the end of the access road? It was smaller than theirs, and instead of cabins, it placed kids in tents along with a counselor. At some point that week, there was an attempted kidnapping there. When I say attempted kidnapping, I don't mean someone tried to pick up a kid who wandered away from camp or looked like they were alone. No. This guy opened an occupied tent in the middle of the night, picked up a random kid in full view of the other campers and counselor, and just took off running into the woods, while carrying this random child. That is quite possibly the most blatant attempted kidnapping I have ever heard to date. I actually had to pause my mom here and check the kid's age, 8 or 9 for the record, because the idea of a man running into the woods while carrying a child is just so ludicrous. The counselor in the tent naturally gave chase, because one does not just sit by when a random stranger opens your tent and scoops up a child. Eventually the man had to drop the boy in order to get away, at which point the counselor stopped his pursuit to redirect his attention to the obvious traumatized child. The kidnapper was never caught. Needless to say, all of my mom's fellow counselors were freaked the fuck out by this, and also outraged that they hadn't been informed of this, since this camp was literally just up the fucking road. The same road where they saw 2 mysterious strangers flee just 2 nights prior. Suddenly, the nerd on the roof wasn't so fucking funny anymore. Week 2 arrives. My mom can't remember if the phone line to Cabin E got repaired and this time or not, but they had more campers this week, so a group of older girls were assigned to it as par custom. My mom and the other counselors continued to stay there as well. Now look at the diagram on the last time. This is a rough layout of most of the vital parts of the camp. The lake, with what my mom calls the pageant area. When I asked for the location, she just fingered on the table far past upper left corner near the pool and said roughly there. This camp was big. At the end of the week, on Friday nights, they would gather the kids there for what she calls an Indian pageant. Again, this was the 70s, different time. What an Indian pageant involves, I don't fucking know, and it's irrelevant to the story. All that matters is that all the kids and most of the counselors were gathered there that night, rounding off the week with one last hoorah before they left the next day. While this went on, someone came running to the pageant grounds. My mom can't remember who it was anymore, but they grabbed her and a couple other counselors and put them aside. Someone broke into Cabin E. Cabin E, the cabin my mom and 2 other girls were occupying alongside a group of other girls. The isolated cabin at the exact opposite of the camp. They took off running, and because of the distance it took 10 minutes to reach it. When they got inside, they found someone out of a horror movie. Someone had gotten into the camper's belongings and tore it all up. She describes the kids' brawls lining the rafters, sleeping bags and pillows all slashed up. The clothes were cut to pieces and strewn all over the place. The cabin was a total mess. All of the camper's belongings were a write-off. But most chilling of all, in the mirror, someone had emptied the girl's toothpaste to write a simple message. The nerd on the roof was here. I don't think I need to explain how terrifying that was. They spent about half an hour cleaning up the cabin before the girls could return. The kids were upset to find their belongings destroyed, but they were told that a raccoon had just gotten inside and tore up all their shit. As far as they knew, it was just a stroke of bad luck. The night passed, and the campers left the next day with no more incidents. Mom's 2 weeks were up, and she went home. She's still in close contact with a lot of her fellow counselors from the last time, and they confirmed that the nerd on the roof did not return after that. Final note. This ends the chronicle of the nerd on the roof. However, there are some final points worth noting that don't fit in the above parts. Specifically, there's a strong chance that the nerd on the roof and the man who vandalized Cabin E are different people. The camp had a nice couple living there as caretakers, along with an adult son who was not so nice. He always gave off creepy vibes. Mom and the other girls now suspect that he overheard them talking about the nerd on the roof at some point, since they talked about him a lot, and used it as an inspiration to break into the cabin as some sort of sick joke. However, since he lived on the campgrounds, it made no sense for him to be the one who jumped off the roof and run to a getaway car that gunned towards town. One theory I have is this: the original nerd on the roof was the attempted kidnapper scouting the camps in advance. The fact that cabin D is at the bottom of the hill with the 3 occupied cabins that week makes this seem more likely. When he realized he had been spotted, he ran off to where his partner was waiting to drive away. If true, it just adds an extra layer to how premeditated the attempted kidnapping was. But after having my mom retell the story to write this up, I realized something which is even more disturbing. As mentioned earlier, my mother's memory of the exact timeline is a bit spotty. We placed the phone line incident on Friday because she remembers the counselors were on edge after the nerd on the roof sighting, but they hadn't seen the headline about the attempted kidnapping. Since it's been over 40 years, she doesn't remember exactly which day the attempted kidnapping at the neighboring camp occurred, only that it wasn't the same day as the nerd on the roof incident. In other words, there's a chance the kidnapping attempt happened on a Friday night, and the other camp is the same direction as Cabin E. I don't think I need to say any more.